The agenda today, we're going to start by just describing Power Automate, talking about what it is, its business purpose, discussing where it fits in the standard Logan methodology, discussing the typical users and organizations that might benefit from Power Automate, and then a demo of Power Automate. So first, the overarching theme of Power Automate is that it's designed to save time, to automate repetitive tasks. So let's say you have a set of tasks to do at every month end. Power Automate might be able to automate some of these tasks so that you don't have to do it every single month. Another benefit is that these results are nearly instantaneous. Now, it does take some time to run the tool. It might take a few seconds, might take a few minutes, depending on how much you have to do, but it's going to be much faster than when you actually manually enter data or manually upload a file to SharePoint, things like that. It's going to be much faster than that. Power Automate's considered to be a no and low code automation tool, and that means that it's designed so that people with no coding knowledge can use it. However, as I mentioned, and as you'll see in the demo, it does have a lot of similarities to code. You'll see for loops, if statements, things like that, that are typical of a developer. Basically the same thing, but one popular example that you might not know is Excel. That's considered to be a no-code tool, although I know some people that basically turn Excel into a programming language, so that's debatable as well. So another thing Power Automate allows you to do is connect to a ton of different systems, D365, SharePoint, Outlook, Teams, that kind of thing. And it even lets you do that with non-Microsoft products. The whole Google suite is pretty much working with Power Automate. And another thing you can do is custom connectivity. So let's say, for example, sales team wants an Excel doc of every user. They might use that information, and so having up-to-date information would be valuable to the sales team. This is called a flow. It just goes from start to finish, pretty simple. I'll talk more about the individual features later. The overall business purpose of Power Automate, like I said earlier, it's to reduce your time waste on a bunch of menial tasks that a lot of people don't really want to do. The general theme is where automation can be implemented, it should be implemented. In addition, it's set up as a low and no code system, allows for people without computer science degrees or years of coding experience to build their own ideas in Power Automate. And also it provides a system just to store a bunch of flows rather than having individual automation scripts in random locations. I've had that experience with previous jobs in school, and that's not the most fun to deal with. So this gives you just a central system to store all of that. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this, but it's good to know. Microsoft has something called Power Apps, and that can be used to store and create flows. And you can do that for specific Microsoft applications. So you might have a flow that references D365, and it can actually be stored in D365. Rather than on a separate Power Automate site. There are two main types of flows that are common in Power Automate and Power Apps. The most common is cloud flows. A cloud flow is in the name, really. It's cloud-based. It means it runs on Microsoft's cloud system. So it can only access things on the cloud. So if I have something like an Excel document that's local to my computer, I cannot modify that with the cloud flow. That's where the desktop flow comes in. Cloud flows are broken down into three different main flows: automated, instant, and scheduled. Automated flows start because something happens. Let's say I get an email. That will cause a flow to run. Instant flows are based on whenever I want the flow to run, I press a button and it runs. Scheduled flows, you can schedule for any time frame. Let's say, like I mentioned earlier, month-end close, you want to run this task every first of the month. So January 1st, February 1st, etc., and it'll run on that scheduled time frame. The desktop flows, they're individual, so they're a lot harder to use, but what they allow you to do is use stuff on your own laptop or personal machine. Like I said, you have an Excel document, you can access that through a desktop flow and make modifications through that. This is the overall flow dashboard and what it looks like. So in the top left, you'll see the name. This specific example is the SharePoint site to DevOps. And what that means is when you create or make modifications to items in the SharePoint, it'll translate those creations and modifications to DevOps. So let's say I create a SharePoint item, it'll create that item in DevOps. That's the whole purpose of this flow. And in the bottom left, you'll see run history. It's pretty in-depth. If you click on each individual run, it'll show you the values at each individual, like each individual piece of the flow. In the top right, you'll see connections, SharePoint, DevOps. In this case, you might have Teams or Outlook or hundreds of thousands of different types of connections, but these are the main ones. And when you build a flow, and you choose SharePoint or DevOps, it'll automatically connect, and as long as you log in. Here we have owners. So here I have Christian, which is me, and then Kelly. Important thing to note is you do not need to be an owner to run the flow. Of course, Kelly and I can both run the flow, but let's say Rosie wants to go and make a change in the SharePoint site. She can make that change, it'll run the flow, and she does not have to be an owner. The purpose of the owner is for people who want to edit the actual flow itself. And this is nice because you might have hundreds of people who need to run the flow, but only 2 people who really need to edit the flow. And then process mining is a newer thing, but it just gives you information about how the flows are behaving. In this case, it shows you the average run duration, which 3 seconds is pretty great for this one. I've made some that are minutes though, so they're not always quick. So Power Automate can fit into a lot of different stages in the methodology. And in the previous example I showed is in the transition between design and development. So it's taking items from SharePoint that are created during the design phase and putting it into DevOps for the development phase. You can also do data population, which is great for data conversion and development. And during launch, you might have clients that have flows that require upkeep indefinitely. One example of that could be vendors sending invoices through email. Let's say you want to convert those invoices into D365 records without having to manually input those records. You can create a Power Automate system that will do that. Who can use Power Automate? Really, at the end of the day, anyone can use Power Automate. Individuals can use desktop flows and basic automations. Maybe you want to create a reminder system. That's a great thing for an individual. A small organization could do larger, more complicated tasks. And a large organization can create flows across multiple different systems. You might use Outlook, D365, Teams, SharePoint, DevOps, all in a single flow. And so, question for you guys, what specific areas of businesses do you think could gain value from this sort of automation?
I think just anytime emailing, just back and forth, if there's some way that an email could then trigger something in the system, that'd probably be beneficial just because I feel like people use email still as the main form of communications. If there's something like that, then that'd probably be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll even show an example of a way with artificial intelligence that uses the email system. But I really think anything can use it. Now, it's not going to be good for everything, but every area of business can use this. Manufacturing can use it, finance, accounting, anything. So Power Automate is licensed into 3 different types: pay-per-user, pay-per-run, and pay-per-flow. Would anyone be able to give an example of a business that could benefit from pay-per-flow, or business type, like how you use Power Automate?
Probably one of those complex ones that you're talking about. A large business.
Well, if you have a complex, maybe you have 1 or 2, but it does a ton of things. That would be great. And you have a lot of users, that'd be a perfect option.
Is the assumption that pay-per-flow is cheaper? Is one plan? I guess we're missing the financial element to this.
Yeah, it's definitely a
case.
It's a case by case. It's just generally, if you have one flow, it's probably going to be cheaper. if you have 100 users, one flow, and you run it all the time, it's going to be cheaper to go with the flow option. But to get into the specifics, you would have to be working with Microsoft on your specific business. Yeah, pay per run could be valuable if you run something yearly. Like you have at the end of the year, you run a set of tasks. That could be a valuable or a cheaper plan. But the standard is pay per user. I think that's pretty common. I've only seen people use pay per user. Yeah. So to get into how a flow is built and how it works. And so generally you follow the same basic steps. First, you set up the connectors. So that's SharePoint, DevOps, that kind of thing. You set up what you're going to be connecting to, and then you create a trigger. And so these are broken down into 3 different types: referential, instant, and scheduled. That's just like the flows that I discussed earlier with automated, instant, and scheduled. And then from there, you're going to manipulate data however you want, and then eventually have some output. Like the output might be uploading a file to SharePoint, could be sending out email, sending a Teams message, something like that. So you'll see in this specific example, what we have is a D365 business event, and that business event triggers every time a purchase order is confirmed. And so once it's confirmed, we get some output. It's just the value, the information of the purchase order. And so we grab that data and sort it into how we need it. And for this example, we're waiting for an approval. So when a purchase order is confirmed, we're sending an approval to some specified user. And then once they approve it, we send out an email with the purchase order confirmation information. And I'm going to be demoing a similar but a little bit different flow for purchase order confirmations. And this specific business scenario for this demo is, let's say we have a client with purchasing managers and they want to keep a close eye on all the purchase orders. And we want to build something that makes it easier for the purchasing managers to keep check of the purchase orders. And so through Power Automate, I'm going to create a flow that sends an email to all D365 purchasing managers every time a purchase order is confirmed. Start that. So this is the main homepage for Power Automate. You'll see here, it already gives you some automation ideas. Every month, copy all files from one OneDrive folder to another OneDrive folder. When the item's created in SharePoint, send me an email. And these are nice because if you click on it, it'll create it for you. They have pre-built templates. Those are just suggested templates. But yeah, they have a lot of different templates. So you might, before you actually build something, you might be able to look it up and see if that's already a pre-built template. So let's see this one, send an email when a new message is added in Microsoft Teams. And it'll just create it. You're going to have to specify your team channel and who the emails to, that kind of thing. But it already gives you a pre-built template, which is pretty nice. But I'm going to be creating a custom flow. So here I go into my flows. Again, you can start from a template. But what we can look at is cloud flows and desktop flows. We have desktop flows that are only limited to people with a premium license, so I can't even create a desktop flow. But cloud flows are more important to look at because they're more common. So I'll start with that. Here we see automated, instant, and scheduled cloud flow, just like we discussed earlier. And we'll start by creating an automated cloud flow. So let's give this a name, purchase order confirmation. You can choose a trigger from here, but I'm going to skip and show that later. And this is the overall flow user interface. On the right side, you'll see a Copilot brought up, so you can type in certain things you want from the flow, and it'll actually create that automatically. It's not perfect, but it'll do a pretty good job, especially for simple things like send an email. But let's start by adding a trigger. And so for finance and operations, the only options you have are whenever a business event occurs. But because a business event occurs, you can create that custom. You can do a lot of different options for finance and operations, but you might have to go and create that business event yourself. But we're already connected to this D365 site, so it gives some options for the different Logan sites. I'm going to choose finance, and it'll load the already existing business events in this finance section. So let's say we have accounts payable, and now you can see, let's say we want this to flow to trigger every time a vendor invoice is posted or a vendor payment is posted. That can be done. I'll be doing this for purchase orders every time a purchase order is confirmed. Now, this part's going to get a bit technical, so if I lose you, don't worry about it. It's not super important to know exactly how it's built, but I would like to show what it can do. So I won't get into super big detail about what I'm doing here. But essentially, this is giving me an output of information from my purchase order confirmation. And I'm grabbing this information using called a schema. So this is all using JSON format, which is a lot like CSV, but it's just a different way of formatting data for those of you who haven't heard about it. And the reason I copied from this previous schema is because this body is going to output some information that's messy. And what I did was send email of this output and then put in the email, put in the output right here, and it just generated this. So that's where that's coming from. But again, it's a bit technical, so I don't want to get into the details right here. And now we want the information on the purchasing managers. So I'm going to grab all the information from a specific table. That table is, so this table gives me all the roles and users and which users have which role. And that's a lot of information. So I'm going to filter it so that I only choose roles where it's equal to purchasing manager, which is labeled by this, identified by this. And again, it's going to be a messy output, so I have to do this again. All right, now getting through that technical piece, what we can do here is go for send an email, and it'll pull up the Outlook one is what we want. And now, so what we have is we have every user ID that is a purchasing manager in the D365 system. And so I need to add our email tag to that in order to be able to send that to me. So what I'm doing here is just adding that. So again, this is why it's a bit technical, but you don't have to know this to have the value in Power Automate. And from this above, we got the individual information for our purchase order. So we're going to scroll down and grab a purchase order number. Save that. And you'll notice here, it created a for loop. And that's because you're going to have you might have multiple purchasing managers. So you want to send an email to each one. And now this flow is built. And so we can go into test. And now what we need, now it's waiting for a purchase order to be confirmed. So we can go into finance and operations and make that happen. Before I do that, I want to show all the user roles. Go to purchasing manager. And you'll see that I have this role and this is my user ID. So the system is looking for this user ID, adds the @loganconsulting.com, and it'll send an email to that user. This works nice for a system where we have our first initial last name, but if everyone has different emails, you might have to do something different. Create a purchase order. Confirm purchase order. This might take a second to load, but in the meantime, has anyone seen any examples of Power Automate being used, or now after seeing that little demo, can you think of an example where it'd be valuable?
In the past, I've used Power Automate to do like a workflow because it integrates with Business Central as well. So I've used it in the past to do basically an advanced workflow with a bunch of different notifications and pathways, which fleshes it out more than what BC has originally for their base workflow. Power Automate definitely helps a lot in that case.
Right, I've actually done something very similar. Yeah, it's super useful when the system you're using doesn't have that functionality, which is good for Business Central. And now our flow has run. It'll give you some information about what happened. So if I scroll down here, it grabbed the information from the purchase order. You'll see like the entity I have. You'll see the purchase order number and transaction amount, vendor account, that kind of thing. But the result was I got this email. Purchase order was confirmed, had the purchase order ID right here, and it worked exactly as expected. You also see that it sent an email to the other account, but that's not really a username, so it just bounced back. But you notice if you have 10 different purchasing managers, it'll send to all 10, and so you don't have to send that individual email manually. Now, this is just a mobile screen, which would be helpful if you're not always next to your computer. Maybe you have a client that's at a manufacturing site and they want to be able to access their Power Automate without having their laptop with them. It has a nice approval screen, instant flows, so you can trigger a flow right from your phone. Works pretty well. And lastly, I'll be showing an AI demo, but overall, the recent increase in AI-based code creation has definitely been picked up by Microsoft. So they're doing their own version. You can assist your flow creation by using AI. It'll generate a flow by what you put in. And as seen above, if you type in send me a message on Teams, every time a new file is added to SharePoint, it'll create this flow, no problem. Now, if you do something complicated, obviously it'll struggle more, but it's still useful. Recently, they've come up with something called AI Builder, and it's a processing step. You can modify data with it. Some use cases are generating image descriptions, extracting data, even converting text to different language, which is what I will be showing. So let's go here, create a new flow. So for this one, I'm going to do it pretty simple. It's every time an email is received, translate the text and send out a different email. So here I'm going to create the trigger, email arrives. A lot of different parameters. Maybe you only want the email to arrive from a certain person, so you can set these. But let's go into AI Builder. There's a lot of cool things this adds. You can use GPT with it. So if you wanted to have an email an email like translated with GPT, you could do that. But they have this own system for translating text. Another thing I thought was cool was, where is it? Objects and images, that's pretty cool. But this one, generate description of an image. I haven't looked at that yet, but it'd be pretty cool to see how successful it is at actually describing a random image it finds, or you give it. Let's start with translating text. Just gonna use the body of the message and then translate it to Spanish. Now, it doesn't have every language, but it does have quite a few. It has a lot of capability. When that happens, we want to send the email out with the translated text. And now every time I get an email, it will translate the text to Spanish and send out another email. I found it valuable at all.
Are you talking about Copilot?
Anything, really.
Use Copilot with CRM a little bit, but I don't think we were asking the right questions. So I think I need to play around with it more, but it's been minimal exposure.
Sure. I know AJ was talking a little bit about using it. It's getting there, not quite there yet, but the flow is done. I just sent myself this email, and you'll see I got this email back. translating this text into Spanish. Please translate this text into Spanish. This is urgent. I need this as soon as possible. Now I did copy this. You don't often get from my other email, so it's not perfect, but it did a pretty good job of translating. And now I need to turn this off because I keep getting spammed with emails. As you'll see, it's already run 3 times. So we have a little bit of time. I'm going to go through some of the potential triggers that Microsoft offers just because there's so many. So let's see here. You can type in Google. I mentioned it offers Google Calendar, Google Tasks, Gmail, new email arrives. It's not quite as in-depth as the Microsoft products, but it's still pretty useful. I think Google Drive exists, but it might not be a trigger. Also, you'll just see there's so many that you can create. So really the possibilities are endless, and you can add your own. So if there's something in here that you're trying to use but isn't offered, you can build it yourself.
That concludes our session on Power Automate. We explored how it can streamline workflows, reduce manual effort, and integrate seamlessly across Microsoft and third-party systems. Whether you're looking to optimize business processes or explore automation for your organization, Logan Consulting can help. To learn more or discuss your specific needs, visit loganconsulting.com or contact us directly. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to helping you simplify and enhance your operations with automation.